This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com, and I have with me again this morning Charles Hugh Smith, well-recognized writer on the web and publisher of the website of2minds.com. Welcome back, Charles.
Thank you, Gordon. Delighted to be here.
Charles, we're going to pick up on another session that we had last month where we left our listeners with a series of, in this case, it was notions rather than questions, and I have them up here. And we were talking about the nature of work and how it's changing. And we said that there's basically these, well, there are many, but we trying to limit it to 7 things that have changed and how they're changing, and by them changing, they're changing the nature of work. And I won't go through them, but I do encourage listeners who haven't heard the tape to go back and review it, because some of the things we may talk about here this morning may be more meaningful. What it led to is where we've moved to a post-capitalist society, which is going to be about innovation. And we all know that we've moved to a knowledge world, and innovation's absolutely critical. And we've left the capital era as we've moved to innovation. And it's important that we just don't pay lip service, that we really understand the significance of what that means as it regards education, occupation, careers, and as we said, the nature of work. You wrote a number of papers actually that was talking about some of this month, 2 classes of workers from the knowledge economy, the decline of self-employment, but springboarding from Drucker's work. Do you want to make any comment on that, Charles?
Yeah, Gordon, you and I are familiar with Peter Drucker's book from the early 90s, Post-Capitalist Society. And of course, it's a catchy title, and we need to be clear that Drucker was not implying that we're moving from capitalism to socialism or some other ism. What he's referring to is we're going to have a new kind of capitalism, which is based not so much on the battle between labor and capital, in which capital always had the advantage, but in his view, knowledge is the new capital. And it's the new means of production. And so, and that's a revolutionary thought. And it doesn't mean that we don't need lumber and oil and so on, but the whole process of extraction and turning these basic materials into products and services is depending more and more on knowledge. And so the people who own the knowledge, within their experience and their skill sets, they actually own the means of production in this new post-capitalist society.
You've always needed knowledge and you've always needed innovation, but capital had been the restraining ability to do so. You could have a good idea, but if you couldn't get the money, because you typically needed bricks and mortar, you needed equipment, you needed factories, you needed things that were capital intensive to take your new innovative and knowledge. That's changed. Because, and for example, software today doesn't require that kind of capital. It just takes a skill and ability and a very inexpensive computer, and you can do phenomenal kinds of things. So it's it's shifted. And so what's happened today is there's no shortage of capital, and there's but the shortage is of labor, but labor has to be defined. When I say there's a shortage of labor, there's lots of people without job, but labor today is not manual labor, it's skilled labor. And as I have here, skilled in capital and labor's in small, it's having skills to be able to do the work. And that goes into what I hear from CEOs all the time. They're talking about they just can't get people. They can't find people for the jobs because we have such an era of a high degree of specialization now. And so what's happening is our educational system is not delivering the right kinds of skills that they need. There's a lack of practical training that they tell me. There's the technology's changing so quickly that the jobs themselves are changing, and the skills that people have to have changed. So we're naturally obsoleting, and there's an obsolescence built into every job as it moves along so quickly. There's a lack of interest in people even wanting to do certain types of work, et cetera. But so there's the hiring organizations today, whether it's immigration and H-1 visas and whatever, they just are having a bear of a time, even though we've got unemployment and the participation rate at the level that is. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing or hearing the same thing, Charles.
Yeah, actually, Gordon, I am reading that, say, highly specialized jobs in, say, oil refineries. You need welding skills and high-level machining skills. These jobs are going begging, if you can believe it. And
Yes.
They're well paying, but you need like high level of skill and experience. And it's the kind of what we used to call blue collar jobs that are actually extremely skill based. People want to be on Dancing with the Stars, or they want to be a rock star, or they want to, somehow make money in sitting in a chair. And so they're sort of avoiding these kinds of jobs that are here. And it's very interesting that when you think about putting, everybody's interested in getting more energy. And so you spend $2 billion putting a drilling rig, out at sea. Well, we know about the 2 billion. That is a substantial amount of capital necessary, but the real value is in the skills of the people that are able to do that kind of extremely technical jobs. And that's what we're talking about. Never mind Google. I mean, there's plenty of software examples, as you say.
The era of the tradesperson is now highly skilled. The amount of even a mechanic today he spends more of his time with a computer, and because all of the computer diagnostics is required to a higher level. So there are a lot of work people don't want, but it requires a level of sophistication and some advanced training to be able to do the job. But more jobs are going unfilled than we really realize in America presently because of this lack of proper training or available training or desire. And as you correctly point out, people are chasing, I don't know, I'll use the word fame, where there's more. It's more important to them to have this recognition than it is just this simple paycheck. The old day of going to work with a lunch bucket and coming home doesn't appeal to anybody. They're looking for something that's more self-fulfilling, and I understand that, but it doesn't propel an economy forward. And what's happening, Charles, is also they have this obsolescence that's so built in now. Technology is dictating that work is continuously changing. So if you had a skill before, your father had a skill, he had a job for life, and he practiced that skill. Well, today, if you have a skill, probably within a few years, it's obsolete. So unless you retrained yourself or readjust it, you're out of work. There are many jobs that you just keep ongoing training and you're all right. But a lot of them, the field itself completely goes away or is completely changed. And so you have to reinvent yourself. And so in mass, in overall, it's creating a new dynamic that we've never seen before, this obsolescence. And so what it's happening too is there's a commitment to these jobs. They're more intense than ever before. The hours, what's demanded of you in doing your job, both parties, both spouses are now working. So there's this tremendous commitment, and when they start to have a family, there's difficulties in trying to balance those commitments. And so we have high levels of divorce, etc., separation, single families, but levels of stress, burnout. So then you get job turnovers, dropouts, you get addiction problems, workplace conflicts. And I talk to people that are in psychology, and they say it's just a horrendous issue for even those who have work and have jobs as they try and balance all of those with this ever-changing needs of the job. Whereas before the job, you could just do it and spend your time focused on your family. It doesn't happen today.
Gordon, I think the point that you're making here is that there is a structural change in the nature of work, and that innovation is not a sporadic or occasional thing. It's now systemic. It's like we constantly have to innovate and add to our knowledge in order to stay employable. And that is a stressful situation, as opposed to going to school for 4 years and learning a job, and then you don't have to learn anything else for the rest of your working career. Of course, that's a lot easier.
Well, you'd be able to pick it up on the fly at work too. So you had a basic, and then there you learned at work, and that still goes on, but not to the degree that's required. Because suddenly, it's like I have many friends that have PhDs. And they say the problem is my PhD is so specialized, so they don't need that, and so they need somebody highly specialized in this area now, and I don't have it. And by the way, I don't have time to go back and do another PhD. So I'm out of work, and this young kid comes in, and he's got a job. And I look at him, and I know he's probably got a life expectancy of 3 years, and he's gone too. So suddenly there's this turnover and this reinvention. And you can't, you've done your PhD, you don't coast now. Now there are exceptions to that. I understand that. But as a rule, it's not there. And so there's this continuous study. I see, for example, my wife's in a senior level of education in dietetics. And she's been doing this for a lot of years. And she is still, the amount of education and study that she goes just to stay current is phenomenal. She's got absolutely no choice but to do that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just trying to say we need to recognize what's going with these jobs and the commitments today, and therefore the stress that comes with it too.
Yeah, and just on a personal note too, Gordon, I think I recently tried to count how many different careers I've had. Not jobs, entirely different careers, and it's between 5 and 7, depending on how, and that's over 40 years of work. So, and I think that's actually more typical than we are willing, normally we talk about. But I think it's very typical that people have a number of completely different careers now in their work life.
That's becoming more and more the norm, and you never expected it to be that way earlier, but it has become. So what's happened is your ability to reinvent yourself has become critical to sustaining employment and occupation during your life, because the world and jobs and nature work is changing so dramatically and so quickly. And organizations themselves who have evolved in the industrial era, have being the primary employers, are no longer the primary employers. They're no longer hiring at the same levels, and so finding work with these places is very difficult. And the models themselves, and I used a couple examples here, I refer to as the Microsoft model, and that is a model that evolved less than 25 years ago with when Microsoft, with the advent of software. So Microsoft, little wee startup, was competing against this huge corporation, IBM, that primarily manufactured hardware, but he came out with an operating system that made the PC a viable alternative, and suddenly with the control of that and developing it with small little, 5 men bought a $50,000 operating system, reinvented the world, and put IBM right on its ear. But what happened in that era, again, capital wasn't required; it was just knowing what to do. But what happened? What the model is that the CEO became the innovator, the visionary, and the driver, right at the helm. So when you go through all of these, whether it's Google, Facebook, all these corporations, the CEO is not an administrator. He's the person with the vision and the skills and the leadership to surround him with people, like-minded people, to be innovative and move forward. That's a different model than a corporation that simply, your ability to understand all elements of a business is what's critical. In Microsoft, I'll hire those people. What's important is to understand the sheer essence, because it's the speed at which the business and the technology is changing that the leadership has to be there. So suddenly we move from being where we're not the constraint is now thought, innovation, and leadership. Whereas before the constraint was capital, because now capital just flows. If you've got the idea, the money just comes, right? And that's what we've seen with all of these startups. So these organizations that are trying to survive are having a bear of a time. Because anybody that they attract that has this innovation, as soon as they've got it, they're gone.
I think your slide here with the Microsoft model and the neural model is extremely insightful. And I'd like to ask you to talk about the neural model, because I think this is really the new global economy model.
Precisely. And I believe that it is. And because, so suddenly today, having an organization where everybody is kind of in the same building and we have meetings and staff meetings and that has moved where they have a competitor. And the competitor now is somebody outside of that world that understands the essence of the business. So what they do is they can put together people of like minds that are remote, just simply on the internet, so that they can network and they can share ideas, and between them they actually create a competitive offering to somebody that's got a company. And by the way, on a web page, you never know how big the organization is behind it, and you don't really care as long as it's honest and sound. But what you care about, can they deliver what it is you need or want? And so people are coming together and creating, like we used to have this word task force in a company. We had a problem. We'd bring everybody together on a task force, different skills, and we would solve the problem. Then the task force would be disbanded because we had solved the problem, because we couldn't solve it any other way. It was a lot of cross-function. Well, today, companies are coming together. There's an idea, a time in a market, there's a product or a need or a service that's needed. Like people figure out how to win-win to share together. They create a solution, and suddenly that can evolve into a much more structured organization, but there's money that's made, and then they either grow or change or migrate or are taken over or take over others and grow from it. Tasks are contracted out. Tasks are just something that you outsource and you find somebody else in the network to do. What's important is the innovation, and so it's the collaboration. It's the innovation where knowing who to connect with is everything, because you can't yourself have all of the abilities. You have an idea, but you're short this or that. You don't go and hire them today. You go find them. You get a win-win together and you collaborate, and suddenly we have money that flows, cash flow. You have a new type of organization. And this is innovation. This is the nature of work. This is how it's going to be. And these people that they're collaborating with, one can be in Holland, one can be in Singapore, and you can be sitting in California. But every day you're talking together. And I know personally, on any given day, I'm talking to people that are involved with my websites and the work that I do all around the world, and they don't work for me. But there's a sharing of ideas and a sharing of revenue. And these are new types of organization. And that's what I refer to as the neural model. So it's the neural model, the Microsoft model are these new types of organizations.
Well, I think your neural model is very well described, and two points about that. One is that, as Drucker himself noted, innovation has to be systemized. It just can't be random. You can't just hope that somebody in your company comes up with a great idea to save the company. It has to be systemized. And so this neural model, that's really what it does, is it systemizes innovation. And by having the collaboration you describe, then you get the creativity. Because, we like to think of creativity being the lone genius in the room, but in actual fact, most of creativity arises from collaboration and cross pollination of different fields and areas of knowledge.
When you look at the organizations themselves, large organizations, medium-sized organizations that have been the employers, they're no longer local employers. They themselves, they have people who work locally, but their tasks are more and more tasks that are carried out on the corporate network and part of a global supply chain, or if you talk to the type of work that they're doing. So the corporations are already beginning to work in that way, and they find the labor and the skills wherever they can find it, and it's changing all the time because the job descriptions of their employees is changing, the type of products that they have. And what's driving that is that product life cycles now are shorter and shorter. The technology advancement is faster and faster. Their business alignments and their relationships themselves with their counterparties is changing so much. And of course, just this whole globalization. So they look at many times that contractors are what they want versus employees, because it's a better solution to allow them to adjust quickly rather than having to lay off people, recruit people. I just buy the skill. So their organizations are already migrating to this, Charles, to this new neural model in many ways. But what happens is they're not able to get the innovation at the speed that they should, because their problem is they have threshold levels of profitability they need to get to. And so in many cases, it's better to be a crony capitalist and live off higher margins than rather than invest in risky propositions. But the flip of it is those who can work at a lower burn rate and don't have those hurdle rates can start substantial businesses. But so few people take that risk. And I would argue that one of the issues is what we were just talking, the stress that's in the job. They have moved themselves into becoming serfs. They're slaves to their debt. They can't afford to miss one payment. It used to be that people started off, they didn't have anything, but they did something and eventually started creating wealth. We today start with an expectation of what we should have, the cost of our cell phones, the new car, etc. We can't afford to invest in ourselves. Hell, the best we could have done was the education. We're done. We're serfs right from the get-go, so we can't take those big leaps of faith with innovation to do the kinds of things that we just been talking about. So by default, it's left to the organization who are slow and cumbersome. But that's changing because more and more people are being forced to do what we're talking about.
That's a critical point, Gordon, and that we have to recall that the key feature of Silicon Valley that everybody wants to get the wealth creation and the innovation from Silicon Valley, but the key feature of Silicon Valley is failure. The freedom to fail and the encouragement of risk, knowing that failure is the most likely outcome of any new enterprise. And so you have to allow for this churn. And you're absolutely right. If you have $150,000 worth of student loan debt and $250,000 mortgage and $50,000 in auto loans and other debt, you aren't able to take that risk because failure's not within the realm of possibility. You have to be lean, mean, have no debt. And only then can you take those risks.
Precisely. And I've talked to enough young people that look me in the eye and say, Gord, everything you say is wonderful. I can't do that. I got a $75,000 student loan and I got to pay that every month. I need a car. I need a cell phone. And where's that money coming from? And nobody's going to bankroll me. I got no choice. I've got to flip hamburgers here. Our expectations and our standards today are limiting our ability to take that risk. Now, there are people that do it. I mean, look, we've got Facebooks and everything else, but most of them started it out of Dell, Microsoft, Bill Gates, Facebook, all Zuckerman, they all started it out of their dorm room, right?
Right.
So before they incurred, and I'm not suggesting that's the answer, out of your dorm room. I'm saying the limiting factor is that it's almost like once you've had the education, you're trapped. This is the new reality, and therefore in America, it's limiting innovation dramatically. You can't start it in the garage anymore, and we're actually surrendering it to these ineffective organizations and corporations who they know the real capital today is knowledge. So they'll buy it. They don't even buy it, they rent it. And then they expend it from you. You're expendable once you've used that particular window where you had that skill after investing all that money to get your PhD. So it actually starts with education, Charles. It
Yes.
starts right back. And by education, it isn't just knowledge, it's attitude and understanding the seriousness of debt, the seriousness of accepting too high a standard of living until you've earned it. Otherwise, you lock yourself out of all these possibilities that are given here.
I would like to say about the education industry, if you will, the education, the higher education industry, that it is become a cartel and become unproductive. And that's why we have the diminishing return, where the cost of a higher education is quadrupling and going up sixfold, and yet it's the yield is just not there. And so we need the place we need innovation the most is in education itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Charles, I couldn't agree with you more. That's a whole discussion show into itself. In my opinion, and I've mentioned a number of times here this morning, is the college university structure is flawed and flawed in a number of ways. But the most fundamental element why it's flawed is universities deliver two things. When you're a professor, and I had some experience of this, is you have two roles. One is to teach and the other is to do research. And you're measured to some degree now today more in teaching, but it primarily how many articles you publish, the quality of your research, how many papers that you've delivered, et cetera, and how well you're recognized. And the university's graded that way. Well, who pays for that research? Well, the answer is students. Students through their tuition. You want an education. You don't care about the research, but you are paying for it. And that research is a significant part of the university's total cost. So yes, in the universities today, the reason tuition's going up, local and state monies are not coming to them, so it's being put out into tuitions. But the real issue is the amount of this free research that universities are doing that are being paid through tuition. And it needs to be broken apart because corporations aren't paying for it. Who wants all these research papers? Who's paying for them? Well, nobody actually, except the tuition. I'm not suggesting it isn't needed, but it is a problem. And the degree of which it's a problem, Charles, is, I saw a study recently that 20% in this particular college, well, actually it was right across the board, 20% of the teachers taught nearly 60% of the credit courses. And yet they were like 30% of the cost. 80%, the other 80% only taught close to 40% of the credits, but were 70% of the cost. And it turns out that if that 80% would just even teach it 50% of the rate of the others, tuition would be cut by half. And what's the reason for that? It's because the time and the energies that they're spending in research, and nobody's paying for it. And I'm not, again, espousing we shouldn't do research, but our model's broken. If you're going to deliver education, deliver education. If you're going to do research, and it should be funded. But it's the old way that we evolved in our educational system. And what that leads to, Charles, it says more education should be online. And that would change it. And so we have new colleges that are starting off to do that. But they're plowing it back. They're taking it out as profits at a significant level. Does that make sense to you, Charles?
Yeah, and I think we need to do a whole program just on that.
Okay. Well, we will, because it's flawed, and we're doing nothing to change it. We're doing we're following a model that worked at the turn of the last century of how professors were recognized. To a model today that no longer works. And if you were at IBM, Thomas Watson's research center has been basically moved out of America. Bell Labs is gone. It basically doesn't exist anymore. Menlo Park doesn't exist anymore. And for those who don't recall, these were some of the greatest research centers in America that built the technology base for America, where Nobel laureates came out of, and did pure research, but it was funded. Now it's not being funded. It's being pushed off. And universities are expected in many cases to deliver this, but the students can't afford it, and we're in a chicken and an egg problem. And I hear nobody, Charles, talking about this problem.
No, you're right. We're continuing to do more of what's failing.
But doubling up at the speed. Anyway, we have to break. Great conversation. We'll be back again next month. Charles, could you tell our listeners how they could learn more about your work, your writings, the things that you're involved with?
Yeah, please come visit me at of2minds.com.
Always look forward to our conversations. They're always a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to next month. Talk to you next month.
Thank you very much, Gordon.
Goodbye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.